Hey, and welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, JR, presented and brought to you by FanDuel. Appreciate you being here as we have another transfer portal recap to get to with this time the Ohio State Buckeyes. Ohio State finished the season going to the playoffs, but ultimately not getting a win in the playoffs. And Ohio State has some big plans this year, it sounds like, in the offseason to try and revamp the roster. This is going to be a very interesting conversation with one Eric Boggs of the OHIO podcast. Eric, tell people where they can find your content out. And you guys have made a change recently with how often you're doing content. Let the people know about that as well.
Yep, we're live every Sunday through Thursday, 8 o'clock Eastern on YouTube at the OHIO Podcast. Over on YouTube, we're all over social media. Feel free to check out our website to find all the links and articles and everything else at theohiopodcast.com.
Great stuff over there with those guys, and a fun group as well, which if you're listening to a podcast, you might as well have some fun while you're listening to it too.
Right.
So all right, Eric, we have the transfer portal here. Ohio State actually first in odds to win the national championship next year on FanDuel. I think last time I looked, they were plus 600. Other teams are up there as well, but a lot of excitement for Ohio State. They do have the number one transfer portal class in the Big Ten, according to 24/7. Now, 24/7 just takes into account the talent you've brought in. They do not take into account the talent that left, and that's really probably one of the biggest talking points with the Ohio State class is the talent that is left. If you look at On3, Ohio State is actually 7th in the Big Ten because of that talent that's left. They brought in 16 players, but they have 32 players that have left. Eric, let's start with the players that are coming in. Ohio State got a kicker. I think that's the first time I've ever seen a Twitter post for a kicker committing to a school get over 1 million views or whatever it did. But Ohio State fans are very excited about that. But they're obviously very excited about other additions too. 2024 made some really good additions. Caleb Downs, Quinshon Judkins, Seth McLaughlin that helped lead that team to a national championship. 2025, a bit of a bust. You know, Max Clare was good this season, but maybe not as good as people thought he was going to be. Ethan Onyeonwa was not a starting offensive lineman for the team, and you could go down the list and name some other guys there too. But do you have confidence that this could be more of a class like 2024 than maybe the 2025 class?
I mean, I do, but I think it's a numbers game. Um, when you start to really dive into roster building and the blueprint of what a roster will look like from season to season, given the way the transfer portal giveth and taketh away from programs, it was bound to happen eventually at Ohio State where you were going to eventually get drilled in the transfer portal. It wasn't just a guy or two who got leaped over. It was eventually going to be guys who their perceived value was much higher than what Ohio State was willing to spend. That seems to be what happened here. And so now you're left in a situation where you needed to bring in a much larger recruiting class than you normally do. 28 guys in the 2026 recruiting class. Usually Ohio State's somewhere around 20 to 21. So they go out, they snag about 7 more guys than they normally do, kind of with anticipation that this was going to happen, JR. And then you lose like almost half your 2025 recruiting class. And then on top of that, yeah, you're gonna just start throwing more darts and hoping some of them hit. I think they got some pretty good guys in the portal with some legitimacy to their naming. Some of them coming off injuries. Maybe they had good seasons the year before. Things of that nature. So when you break it down and you look at it like that, like Terry Moore, safety, all ACC in 2024, has the injury. How will he play this year? Dominic Kelly, young cornerback from Georgia, coming in as a sophomore, got a ton of playing time at the end of the season for the Bulldogs. John Walker, my favorite name, Johnny Walker, coming in from UCF, the junior defensive tackle. Dealt with some injuries in the past. Earl Little Jr., safety from Florida State, same deal. And then you got the big names from Alabama, right? James Smith, and Russaw. You're what you're doing is you're just throwing as many darts as you can at the board, hoping some of them land. Where in the past they were a little bit more strategic. I think they were a little bit more like a sniper rifle. This feels more like a shotgun here. We need bodies. Hopefully, some of them will hit. but Ryan Day and Ohio State's always going to they're always going to bring in people, JR, who fit what their idea of what the culture is should be and needs to be. They're not just going to go out and get the top rated guy and throw a bunch of money at him, hoping he comes in and that fixes the problem. They're going to make sure that it doesn't disrupt what they're currently trying to build in the locker room. So I feel like this was a little bit different change of pace for Ryan Day and his coaching staff in this portal season, but it was necessary given what happened.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, you had a number of guys leave the program, and it feels like some of these guys are coming in to replace them, but maybe they are coming in to replace them with some more experience. And that's really what it seems like Ohio State is going for now. Terry Moore did not play this last season because of the ACL injury, but like you said, in 2024, he had a really good season. Hunter Welsing, tight end from Northwestern, I believe it's probably going to be his 6th or his 7th year in college football. Earl Little,
Seventh year
7th.
senior.
Yeah, which is crazy. Earl Little, I know he declared for the draft at the beginning
Mhm.
of like the offseason, and then he took his name out of it, and then now he transfers to Ohio State. And then you got some more Alabama guys. I mean, Eric, what do you think about my stat here? I posted it on Twitter, and didn't gain as much traction as I thought it would. The last time Ohio State took 3 Alabama transfers, they won the national championship.
Well,
You got 3 here.
yeah,
Is that
we
what to expect?
well, we appreciate Tuscaloosa training, athletes for us here in Columbus, Ohio. I
The
mean,
triple A team, yeah.
yeah, our AAA team there in Tuscaloosa. I'm kidding, Bama fans. My gosh, no, it's going to be interesting to see how they react. Yeah, last time we went to the SEC, well, it turned out pretty good. You brought up you brought up the Alabama guys, obviously, that performed admirably. Julian Sayin still doing so, by the way. Uh, you know, but let's not forget when they went down to Ole Miss and got Davison Igbinosun, and then the very next year, Quinshon Judkins too. So they've been doing well of going down and kind of poaching the SEC a little bit, bringing some guys up north to fit into what we've currently been developing. And I feel like Ohio State they're going with some older guys. Normally they don't, but they are in this instance because I feel like Ryan Day and his coaching staff, JR, feel like there's a window here where they can win a national championship. Last year, this year, next year. Julian Sayin, third year. Jeremiah Smith, third year. Bo Jackson, second year. There's a window here. All the linemen, seniors, you're returning 4 starting offensive linemen, at least 3 of them I think are solidly going to start in 2026. So offensively speaking, there's a window here. What you need to address was the defense because again, you're losing a ton of talent to the NFL off that defense, and I feel like they were very strategic in what they did with that.
Let me ask you one more question about the additions, and then we'll move on to the departures. A lot of Ohio State fans, I think, were wanting more additions on the offensive line. You didn't really get that this transfer portal cycle. You got plenty on the defensive line. You got some linebackers who could play down on the line of scrimmage as well. Most likely still going to be linebackers, but could definitely go down there, be some stand-up guys. And in this Matt Patricia defense, we know that's going to be utilized quite a bit. Are you concerned? Do you think fans are rightfully concerned that maybe they didn't go out and get an offensive line transfer, even with, former starting offensive lineman Tigre Shabola, which I know the fans are not too, sad that he's moving on. But are you concerned that Ohio State didn't go into the portal and get anybody?
Yes and no. I mean, I thought the offensive line was going to be much better than what they performed down the stretch in those last 2 games. Against Indiana, against Miami, they looked ill prepared. You go into that game in Ann Arbor and they looked dominant. So I think there was some inconsistencies in play, obviously. But I think Austin Severveld, um, Carson Hinsman probably both get drafted if they go to the NFL, and they came back. So I feel like you have the nucleus you need. I do know that they were seeking another lineman. Price tag was too high than what they wanted to pay. They looked at what they had. I also think they got a little gun trigger happy, or like a little hesitant there, because of the name you brought up earlier, and Ethan Anyanwa. That spending $1 million to $1.5 million for a guy who didn't even break the 2 deep on your current offensive line, kind of scary stuff. Should we really go out and spend a lot for an offensive lineman? They're going to probably bring in a body to throw in for depth purposes with what they have now. I think the numbers break down. They still need at least one more offensive lineman. So they're not done adding. It's just I don't think you can expect them to get a big name. It's probably going to be a depth piece here at this point. But yeah, there's some concern there. I think year number 2 here of Tyler Bowen as offensive line coach, very, very important. There's quite a few Ohio State fans, JR, who have him circled or highlighted as you better show something to us this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's been something that they really need to see some good stuff from every season, and it felt like the offensive line for Ohio State was doing a really good job. And then those last two games, like you said, looked a little ill prepared. We'll see if they can get them prepared for next season. And I do want to say they did have a transfer portal option on campus visiting earlier this week. He is from Dartmouth, though, and from everything I can tell, and from watching some tape, which I don't watch a ton of FCS football, but from what I can tell, he would be probably that depth piece that you were talking about, Eric. So does not sound like the starting left tackle or anything for the
No,
teams.
no,
So
no. His last name is not Seaton. So there you go.
yeah, exactly. All right, so on the other side with the departures, Eric, for the first time ever, Ohio State has seemed to go, kind of go through a portal exodus here of some of the young players. Only one starter is gone, Tegre Shabola, as I mentioned earlier, but multiple players who were projected to be starters. You got guys like Fahim Delane, Quincy Porter could have possibly been your number 2 wide receiver next season. Those guys are gone from next year. How much concern does it give you that the amount of talent that has been lost, obviously much more potential rather than proven production, but how much concern is there for you with how much talent was lost in the portal?
Yeah, it's the world in which we live in now, JR. What is your value? Your perceived value versus your actual value. Well, your actual value is what someone's willing to pay you. That's the truth. That's the fact of it. However, Ohio State also believes in a thing called ROI, return on investment. We better see production based off of the value that we are willing to pay you. And if we don't see that value because we see you every day in practice, we see, are you on time? Are you early? Are you prepared? How much are you watching film on your iPads? They see all of this. Are you dedicated to the weight room, your nutrition? All of it is being watched. And if someone walks into Ryan Day's office and says, my client is worth X amount of millions, and Ryan Day and Pantone sit down and go, he's only worth this amount of thousands, feel free to go test the market, then that's going to happen. And I think that happened a lot, not just to Ohio State, but to a lot of college football teams. And there are some who will look at that and say, we're willing to take a chance because we're in desperate mode. We need you for our team, for our room, depending on your position. And Ohio State looks at that and says, I guess we're not. So it's hard for fans to swallow and look at it from that perspective, JR, because it's more of an NFL off-season free agent model, if you will. Although I say that what college football is going through is much different than free agency. But at the end of the day, if you can take the emotion out of it and you just sit back and you look at it and you listen to what you said at the beginning, potential versus proven talent, Ohio State is always going to lean more to paying for proven talent. That's why the number one percentage on the pie chart when it comes to recruiting and when it comes to transfer portal and when it comes to player retention, number one is always player retention. They're going to spend the most money on the players who are proven that they need to bring back in order to have continued success as they build their program. And so, yeah, I'm sorry. Julian Sayin, Bo Jackson, Jeremiah Smith, those offensive linemen, Brandon Ennis, Kenyatta Jackson Jr., those guys are going to get paid first. not you who's on second string who, well, now's your chance to go prove yourself. No, you're going to have to prove yourself first. And I'm talking beyond just your star rating coming off of 247 or on 3 when you were in high school.
It's a crazy world we live in because you're not just competing with the guys in the same room as you. You're also, at a place like Ohio State, competing against all of college football. It feels
Right.
like for starting spots, because if you didn't do well enough in practice, and I'm not saying any of these guys did, I'm just making a general statement here, that if you don't do well enough in practice, there's always somebody out there in the portal or something like that.
Yeah, well,
So,
I'll give you a perfect example as an Ohio State fan, and there might be some Ohio State fans who aren't going to like what I'm going to say, but you had Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate both on the sideline injured. This was Mylan Graham's opportunity to show up, and he didn't even get the start. What's that tell you?
well, and I know Ryan Day said as much in his press conferences,
Yep,
talked about how Milan needed better practice habits and stuff like that. And listen, we're not here trying to disparage Milan Graham or anything like that, but we are using it as an example because it's been voiced out there. And in these certain circumstances, you gotta be really great on the practice field if you want to make it to the playing field. So we'll see how that works out for him. I think Notre Dame is happy with the athleticism and everything that Milan Graham has. And who knows, Milan Graham could be excellent at Notre
sure.
Dame. Sometimes it's just about change a scenario, change a place that you are. And I think Milan Graham is a fantastic talent.
I
I would,
I do as well, and
yeah,
I'll be honest, I think Mylan Graham needs structure, and I think you're gonna get a different I shouldn't say more, you're gonna get a different kind of structure in South Bend than you are Columbus, Ohio. You just are.
probably. Yeah. Yeah. So, wishing all the guys that departed all the best. We're obviously not trying to disparage any of them here, wishing them the best, but it is the world we live in with the transfer portal and everything else right now. And that's just kind of how things go on out there. One thing that Ohio State did not do very much of in the transfer portal, Eric, is they did not do much with quarterbacks, right? They went out and got Justin Martin, the former backup at UCLA. He was going to thought he was going to start, or maybe people thought he was going to start there at Maryland, but Malik Washington gets the start this season over Justin Martin. Big quarterback, big guy, but he doesn't have very much playing experience. I think he started one game at UCLA while he was there. He comes in here to Ohio State, obviously more of a backup situation rather than trying to compete for the job with Julian Sayin. Eric, what are your thoughts? Are fans excited? Are you excited to see Julian Sayin for year 2, or do you think that Ohio State maybe should have been more proactive in the portal and gone after one of these like 4th, 5th, 6-year seniors, like the Carson Becks, like the Fernando Mendozas that have playing experience and come in? Because Julian Sayin, as much as he does have a year of playing experience, he's still only a 3rd-year guy. He's still pretty young. And in college football nowadays, it feels like you need that 4th, 5th, 6-year guy in order to win a national championship. That's what Ohio State did with Will Howard. I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
I think if you're Ryan Day, you have to trust your ability to develop quarterbacks. And there was a gap. There was a gap between, where we were at given what happened with Kyle McCord and Devin Brown and where we needed to get to Julian Sayin. There was a gap there. Will Howard was the perfect gap filler. I don't think I think if you go out in the portal and you start trying to find a 23, 24, 25-year-old man with 4, 5, 6 years of experience in college football, you run the risk of ruining all the hard work you've put in recruiting and developing in that quarterback room. Julian Sayin, year number 2, after basically resetting the record books on passing completion percentage in 2025, sign me up. Let me see what another year of development looks like with Julian Sayin. And oh yeah, by the way, Tavian St. Clair, the number 1 recruit from the state of Ohio from a year ago, will get a second year of development before he takes a snap under center as a starter at Ohio State. Like there's a plan there, and I think you wanna see that plan out. You don't want to abandon ship on it just yet, just because the new fancy tool that everybody's talking about are these experienced quarterbacks in the transfer portal. So I'm not on that train, but there are some Ohio State fans who, for whatever reason, see Fernando Mendoza and see the grit, I think, and the determination and the I'm not, I'll get busted under the chin, bleed, and go right back out there, and then on fourth down, run for a touchdown. Like they see that. Who doesn't want that? I mean, Tom Brady was on the sideline wanting that. Okay. So, of course, everybody wants that. But if you abandon Julian Sayin now for a hope and a dream, you can find the next guy, and then that fails, you may have just set your program back 2, 3 seasons because you were out there chasing a shiny toy instead of staying true to your plan of development, recruit, development, and keep these kids in line to where they need to be. Julian Sayin is not a bad quarterback. He was fourth in the Heisman ranking, okay, and voting. And one might, and I believe, tell me if I'm wrong, JR. I haven't looked at your connection with FanDuel. You might be able to find this out or know this off the top of your head. He's got to be pretty high up there for Heisman hopefuls starting off this offseason, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
if
he
you go
was
to the
there in New York.
Heisman odds on FanDuel, he is tied for fourth with Jeremiah Smith plus 1,300. Gunnar Stockton, Sam Levitt, and Dante Moore also tied at fourth there. Josh Hoover, CJ Carr, and Arch Manning, the only four in front of him, or only three in front of him.
And I think if you asked any Ohio State fan, man to man, would you trade Julian Sayin for Arch Manning? They would say no. So, okay, sure.
Especially not the
Man,
way he looked in Columbus last year. Yeah.
Manning gets you a few extra points on FanDuel, I guess. Okay, I got you. Good name, good last name to have. I mean, it's not a bad last name, but I digress. You see what I'm saying? Like I'm not panicking about it. I'm on the let's continue to support Julian Sayin train. Let's see what his development looks like with another off season. Let's keep in mind, 2 years ago when he first came here, he wasn't the guy. That was Will Howard, and he kind of was in the background a little bit, developing. And then it was going to be competition with, with Lincoln Keenholz, and so he has that offseason. This will be the first offseason where he's the man. All, first team reps, baby. They're all yours. No competition this summer. I think Julian actually takes a step. And if I think Ryan Day takes the handcuffs off a little bit and says, "Hey, on that 3rd and 8, if there's a lane there, go get it." I think that changes the mindset completely of Buckeye Nation when they look at their quarterbacks.
I think Julian Sayin using his legs in year 3 is going to be the most important thing. Year 2 starting, but I think that's going to be one of the most important things. And I think a lot of people don't realize is that Julian Sayin, his model for what he wanted to be when he was coming out of high school was Bryce Young. And Bryce Young used his legs a lot, so maybe Julian Sayin still has some of that in him. There, I would love to see Ohio State maybe run some QB draws or something like that with Sayin, but obviously he's not as big as Will Howard or Fernando Mendoza or anything like that. But still, you can utilize that in such a way, and I think it would help Julian Sayin maybe utilize his legs a little bit more. So, all right, Eric, great stuff here. Really appreciate the conversation and you kind of recapping Ohio State's transfer portal haul and departures with us. Is there anything else on Ohio State transfer portal you want to get to before we get out of here?
Yeah, I don't know how much you've been talking about athletic directors and what they've been talking about with suing other programs and other things lately, but all I can say is Buckeye Nation right now, when it comes to our athletic director, Ross Bjork, boy, there's a lot of people throwing a lot of arrows his way that think that Ohio State's inability to be the best in everything, including the transfer portal at times, is his fault. I'll say this: I think Ross Bjork has been very careful to make sure that Ohio State is following all the guidelines and rules set forth by the NCAA. The problem is, I feel like those guidelines and those rules at times, JR, are sketchy at best, unclear at times, and it's caused a lot of angst in Buckeye Nation this offseason. I don't think that's Ross Bjork's fault. I'm sure I just made the rest of your Ohio State fans mad at me with that comment, but I don't think it's Ross Bjork's fault.
I don't think so either. We've talked about it a little bit. I think right now in college football, you just got a whole bunch of chaos. And right now, unfortunately, there's some athletic directors that are trying to do some things the right way, and there's some that are just saying, "Who cares?" And at the end of the day, I don't even blame the athletic directors at this point. I just blame the NCAA and their complete inability to lead and do anything. And it is what it is. So I would love to see what Ohio State looked like if they did take the handcuffs off, because right now they're number 4 in the transfer portal rankings on 24/7 with only 16 commits. I mean, they're in front of teams like Penn State, Oklahoma State, Kentucky, Texas Tech, teams that have 20 or more commits. I mean, Oklahoma State has 54 commits, and they even have a 5-star, Drew Mestemaker, that's there. So if Ohio State ever gets the handcuffs taken off of their NIL stuff and what's going on there, who knows? We could see Ohio State just go crazy in the transfer portal.
Let's portal a championship, I guess. They would that would be
There
the
you go.
next talking point from the ESECPN, right?
Yeah,
Ohio State
yeah.
portaled their championship.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right. Well, thank you, Eric, for coming on here. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Go check out Eric and his guys' podcast over at the OHIO podcast. Wonderful podcast there. I even appear on it sometimes with Eric and the guys over there, and love doing it. They're great guys and a great listen over there. So check them out. We appreciate it. Have a good one. We'll see you next time.